welcome to the Question Show, a special episode of Swedenborg and Life Tonight. Great to have you here. And this is an extra special Question Show because we're going to play a game on this show. And this game is called One of These Things Is Not Like the Others. And right now, you can't tell. Okay, there you go. So at home, write it in the comments section. One of these things is not like the others. My name is Curtis Childs, and I'm the host of Swedenborg and Life, and I'm very happy to be here. What we're doing today is, at the end of each episode, I make this, I'm trying my best, but it often falls flat. I make an attempt to answer questions from the audience. So I thought we'd get a group in here and do that together. Attempt to answer questions and come up just a little short. Because there's a lot around Swedenborg and we want to try to get to it. So I want to tell why I have the people here that I have. Right to my left here, this is Cara Dom. You've probably seen her on the show before. So Cara is involved in translation. And if this is not fair, tell me. Cara is involved in translating. She's a Latin consultant for the New Century edition of Swedenborg's works, which means everything we see on the show, I read things, they appear beside me, that's all New Century edition, these new translations. You should see Swedenborg before they got a hold of it if you think he's hard to understand now. So they've done a lot of good work. So you've been pouring it over in the original language, understanding it. So this is somebody who's seen a lot of Swedenborg. So thanks for coming. Then camera 2. There we have Dr. Jonathan Rose, who is actually steering that ship, the New Century Edition ship. He's a series editor, longtime Swedenborg scholar, and you've seen him on the show as well. So that covers our translation side. Thanks for coming, Dr. J, if I can call you that. And then Chelsea on the end there, she works on the show. I mean, you're watching the show. She's part of the writing team. She's doing stuff for our Facebook page. So there's people, and so she's interacted with this same audience that's giving us all these questions to you guys, which you're all cool out there. So that's us. We were talking beforehand about we're not really a panel of experts. We're just a panel of friends, your friends, who are going to try to take questions and do our best to elaborate on it and get to the root of it. So that's plenty for that. Let's take a look. So how the game works, you guys are watching live. Get your questions in, and we'll answer them. We asked for questions beforehand, so we have a little stash, but we'd love to take some live from you as well. So that's the game. That's how it's played. Are you guys ready to go? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's take a look at the first question. This is, I'm curious about how Swedenborg was treated by his peers, by French Fry, which is a delicious name. Thanks for writing in French Fry. So Swedenborg, right? We think of him as a set of books or just a guy with a painted picture of him. But he was a person, and if you're going to come out and say, I saw angels and I saw spirits and I'm writing this book about how God really works, and you were a scientist before, your people are going to have a reaction to that. So what was the reaction? Was everybody back then making shows about him? Like, this is how cool Swedenborg was? What was it? So I want to start with you, Jonathan, because you probably know better than I. How did it land when he jumped this cannonball?
Well, Emanuel Swedenborg was a nobleman, and he was part of the Swedish government, being the oldest male in his family. He was a pretty powerful person in Sweden at the time, and he had very good friends in the royal family of Sweden, in the monarchy. So he was pretty well protected, and people were pretty nice to him in public, and so on. There was a whole range of opinions that people had about him behind the scenes. He even talks about a brother-in-law of his who repeatedly tried to kill him and wanted to kill him. There was at one point a movement afoot in the Swedish parliament, the Swedish Diet, to try to have him declared insane because he was so politically powerful. Mm-hmm. He definitely had enemies. Sometimes there are stories that exist that he would go to a party and there'd be people there who went there just to laugh at this guy who talks to spirits. And then when they'd listen to him, they'd just be charmed and enchanted and listening like a child to a bedtime story or something like that. So I think he had an interesting effect on people, but it was all over the map.
I feel like, all over at one end would be repeated attempts to kill. I mean, that doesn't get worse than that.
So that's right.
That lands pretty hard. That's a little worse than getting a YouTube comment that's like, this show is dumb or something.
Yes,
like that. Right. So, yes, there was like Kant, and there's a sort of murkiness around that he seemed to be enamored with him privately, but then became critical of him. It could have been to protect his reputation. I don't know. I wasn't in his head, but so kind of a range. And I do remember that he had some people who he thought would be close friends and supporters who kind of turned on him, right?
That's right. He had some people who he thought would love his books, and they secretly, didn't or tried to get rid of them as fast as possible, and they turned out to actually be enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his intellectual peers, and then the people who we once did a show about this. The people who just knew him thought he was nice. I mean, the people he rented from, all that kind of stuff.
He was very well loved. He was very popular with people from all levels of society.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you were in the nobility at that time, you'd have friends of other noble people, but his gardener and his cook just loved him. The children in the neighborhood loved him. He was a very well-loved figure by a lot of people, but he was controversial and hated by some.
There you go. Now, Cara, Chelsea, do you guys want to say anything about that particular question, or do you feel like that's it for the peers question?
I guess I have one reflection of something I think is coming to mind from a biography I read of Swedenborg, but just that from what stories I've heard and read, that he was a pretty welcoming person. He would take calls from people. If somebody wanted to go and visit him, he would welcome people into his home and talk. So it just seems like he was personable, or sort of he didn't sort of shut himself off from society because people were hating him and wanting to kill him or whatever. So that was just a thought.
Yeah,
that's true. Gracious guest.
Maintained a decent attitude, or so they say. Who knows?
What do we know?
Okay, and there we go. So we got to end with what do we know? Okay, let's take it. That's a great question. Let's take a look at another one. Jacopo. Does Swedenborg talk about war? Some Christians say that fighting a war is sinful, but I struggle with that a lot. Are soldiers who kill in war guilty of murder? War is horrible, but sometimes needed. It's a great question. I was going to say I'll fire the opening round, but not for this question, right? I do want to say sometimes, no, Swedenborg does not come down and say no war is permissible, right? I mean, this gets into, because he says that there's love of the neighbor depends on what kind of neighbor it is. If there's a nation that's trying to take you over, kill everyone within, the loving thing to do is protect the people who are there, right? Does anyone want to disagree with me on that?
No, I think that's very accurate. And he sees a huge difference between a defensive action, that if you're under attack, you defend yourself and so on. The way he speaks about the angels in heaven is that they always defend. They don't go on a preemptive strike or something. So he sees a difference between defending territory that is yours, as opposed to just going across the world and attacking preemptively or that kind of thing. I don't think he would support that idea, but he does believe that it can be an important part of loving your country, that your country is a larger form of the neighbor than the individuals or your community. Your country is like a parent to you. It nurtures you and so on. So it can be very important to protect that, and it just seems kind of inevitable. And yet he says that the things that are done in war, many of them are horrific or hellish, and so he's not sort of dreaming about what war is.
Right. And well, Cara, do you want to talk a little bit about the importance of intent as he describes it? He says that angels can see an action and put a bunch of different interpretations on it. It's really about what we're trying to do when we do it, right?
Yeah. Right. The intention is our purposes in any action is what is judgeable, I guess you would say. And we've sure heard lots of stories about people that soldiers that have had a tough time with what they had to do in war. That is not, the act itself is not going to make the difference about their salvation.
Yeah, because and that's the only thing that makes sense. Because if you, it's not like a scorecard. You killed a person, so that's it for you. There's all kinds of situations where I have to do this to stop something worse from happening. It's self-defense, those kinds of things. And it's, if this is what has to happen to stop a greater evil or something, even if it turns out it wasn't the right thing to do, if you thought it was, if you really thought I'm trying to do what's right, even if it's something that's really hard to make a call on, I can't, wouldn't that be what matters? So those are a few of my thoughts. Chelsea, do you have any furthers on this?
The only thought that's coming to my mind is that just how prevalent war imagery is in the Bible, and that seems like it's, I don't want to say necessarily like it's condoning war, but just that it's acknowledged. It acknowledges just the presence of war, that is reflective of our spiritual experience, that there's like battles that we go through internally, and so just that is something that we see in our world outside and inside. And but I used to get really frustrated about the battle imagery in the word, but I feel like like I had a moment of understanding how that's just what happens when something's being protected, that then the outcome can be this warlike experience.
Yeah, well, we could talk a long time about the war between heaven and hell, and how Swedenborg describes it, as you're saying, that good truly comes alive when it's protecting, and evil truly comes alive when it's it's not just like heaven's got an army, hell's got an army, one's going to destroy the other and that one wins. That hell wants to destroy everything. The nature of the kind of love that drives hell is to destroy everything. Heaven is trying to protect everything, even protect the people in hell who are attacking while they're attacking. So, I mean,
that's right.
Do you guys want to say one or two things about that before we get on to our next question? But I feel like we could talk about that forever.
Well, it's a beautiful thought that Swedenborg expresses, that that heaven fortunately has the upper hand. Love is more powerful. Love and truth are more powerful than the darkness, than evil and falsity, as he refers to them. And that angels, even at times when there needs to be an entire restoration of the state in the spiritual world that happens from time to time, still all the angels do is they just draw a line that says you're not allowed to come past here, but you're fine over there. Fortunately, heaven does not have it in for hell. It doesn't want to destroy hell or wipe them out. That's the way hell feels about heaven, that they want to destroy. So fortunately, heaven has the upper hand.
Absolutely. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering, isn't there somewhere where he talks about the spiritual causation of wars in the world?
Yes.
Is there anything that comes to mind to you about that? Something's ringing a bell in my mind.
Reordering of heavens or spiritual.
Well, he says at one point that all wars in the world reflect states of the church.
That's right.
So so now we're really moving from the initial question, but
okay, sorry.
if you that's the point. But if we want to go, like we're going down one rabbit hole, and look, there's a rabbit hole in that rabbit hole, because he talks about how in the Old Testament the different countries symbolize different aspects of what you could call the human psyche. I mean, the church, which is this internal thing. So those different countries represent that, and they when they war, that's like the clash between heaven and hell. But he said that in his day, various countries in Europe were representing the same thing.
Same thing.
But he wouldn't say who was who. So I would imagine if it's all true, you would have a whole different set of representations today. And what are those wars? It's not just like, it's like those wars are the end effect of wars in the spiritual world, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, does anyone disagree? Yes.
I don't disagree. I just had, this might be going down another rabbit hole, but just that idea that in the same way that it's nice to remember, because war it immediately brings up the idea of an enemy. But it's cool that the wars that are inside of us, it's all us. And so wars that are in this world, we're all in it together. The more we realize that we're one person that's figuring itself out spiritually in a community, collective way, then there's, I don't know, that gives me some hope. Because life isn't just this physical experience. It extends, to eternity in the spiritual world. And so even if somebody is brought to the point of killing somebody in a war, it's a piece in this greater puzzle, and everybody has a path. And I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, that's sense. And I will add to it this, which is that in these spiritual conflicts that you can find yourself in, everything is trying to bring out good. And it was the coolest thing for me about Swedenborg's interpretation of the Old and New Testament. If you guys haven't ever picked up Secrets of Heaven, we just did a show called The Modern Cain and Abel, which is about this violent story in the Old Testament. One of the coolest things for me when I was first learning this stuff is that Swedenborg, the internal sense he describes, takes a story that's really objectionable. It's really violent, grotesque in some way. But when you hear what it's actually about, it's this really loving thing of like the divine trying to help somebody who doesn't understand what. So it's just this complete turnaround, and I think that that's cool. Okay, we got to go to the next question. We're averaging one question like every 19 minutes. So this is from Jim on YouTube. I've recently had numerous experiences with people with autism and bipolar problems. Are these physical problems like a staph infection, or are these spiritual illnesses? Whoa, that's good. Okay, so let's get ready to say I don't know.
I don't know.
All together now.
1, 2, 3. Now, but I don't know, but there are some scattered things Swedenborg says about it. So, okay, I've been talking a lot. Do you guys want to start? Okay, great. Okay, good. I'll go. Just kidding.
You go.
Yeah. No, you go. No, I don't know anything.
No, you go.
Okay, all right. Well, these are the pieces. I'll put out some pieces, and you put them together.
Okay.
The physical matters. There's nothing that's purely spiritual. I mean, in our consciousness, the spiritual is interacting with the physical. You often get in spiritual kind of traditions or current spiritual worldviews, people will say, "Oh, it does not about the brain at all. It's all spiritual." But scientists will come back and say, "Listen, we know that the brain is what makes consciousness because you injure a party at Phineas Gage, that guy that you learn about in textbooks. He had a railroad spike go through his head and it turned him into a different person, right? So that proves we can shut down your language center. You don't know language anymore." However, Swedenborg makes that same argument to prove his point. That he says, injure these substances and you'll go out of your mind. So to him, that the mind is an organ like the eye. The eye takes in light and makes images. The mind takes in spiritual things. And if the mind is damaged, you have a problem. However, he also says that he mentions things like anxiety, depression being caused by spirits. So those are a couple irreconcilable things. So reconcile them.
I like that. Swedenborg says that inflow is according to the receiving vessel.
Mm-hmm.
So he believes there's these two separate worlds, the spiritual world and the physical world, and that the physical world is a world of causes and the spiritual world is a world of causes, physical world is a world of effects. So he would not believe that physical things flow into the spiritual world and cause stuff to happen up there, but that inflow from the spiritual down into the physical is according to the form of the receiving vessel. And so just like, let's say if it's raining and one person has a bucket and another person has a thimble or something, the amount of rain you catch, the rain is coming down from above, but it still very much depends what the vessel looks like. And we've all had that experience. You get anesthetic before surgery or whatever substance that you put in your bloodstream, it changes the way that you feel.
Being hungry,
even though it's just purely being hungry.
Being hungry changes the way.
Yeah, that's right. Being angry or whatever, it changes the state of the vessel. I wouldn't hazard a guess to say in the case of autism and so on, what is going on. But I think there's something going on with the vessel. The vessel's
in the
different
physical world.
In the physical world. The physical vessel is a little different, and so that changes the nature. It doesn't mean worse or. It's not an evaluative thing or whatever, but it's just you have different gifts or a different circumstance. So it may be of the vessel, but it does change the way that inflow happens.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. You guys, any other thoughts?
Just that, like, the experience of thinking again about sort of our collective experience, that there is this, he does talk about how evil and hell that has brought about nasty physical things in our world, or diseases or things like that, ultimately have sort of that kind of origin, I think, but just because one person gets a certain disease doesn't mean that they're guilty of some particular evil, but it's just sort of like we all can have bad days because we're all in this world. Yes.
Well, you think about on a physical level metaphor, pollution. I was watching this documentary once about mountaintop removal mining, which is where they have, like, in Appalachia in the United States, they have these mountains and they just blow up the whole top and try to grab out some coal. And there's these little towns in the valleys, and the kids in those towns were having autism at these astronomically high rates because the water had mercury in it. And it was from what these guys were doing up on the mountains, but the company was denying it. So on. The point is, those kids, the reason they were having autism is not because they deserved it. It's because they're part of this larger matrix. And so Swedenborg is just saying the matrix extends to the spiritual world. So the evil overall can affect everyone. It doesn't mean you have that particular... Like what this guy, was he born blind because his parents sinned, or from the New Testament?
Right.
Okay, so those are a few words that I said in sequence.
Yeah.
Cara, do you have any thoughts?
I think he covered it.
Well, okay, so this is what I want to say about our answer, to defend our answer to you guys at home. We shouldn't know the specifics about something like that because if it's real, it's going to be really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Swedenborg, by the time that Swedenborg was there, that things like autism, these were not diagnosed, they weren't categorized like that. So he would have just had a few building blocks. So you actually look at people who study those disorders now, you have to be a specialist and get in there, do all these studies to figure out anything about it. So we are going to have some thoughts on it, but we shouldn't be able to just, I know the root answer to this complex problem because I've read Swedenborg. He wasn't even focusing on something like that. So I think we're doing a great job.
Yeah. Can I say one thing?
No, that's it. Just kidding. Okay, go ahead.
It's almost more satisfying sometimes to say just general ideas about it than trying to tease out specifics, but just knowing that one thing I do know is that we have physical minds that are in the physical world, and our minds are also connected to the spiritual world. So they're both there. And I love something that we keep coming back to in doing shows is just that we know that the physical world is incredibly intricate and complicated. And so we sort of then think that the spiritual or the spirit is somehow just this monotype, just fluid thing. Of course it's going to be something as intricate and complex, as the physical world.
Let's get to our next question. And for this question, I'm not going to tap on the table as much as I have been. Okay. This is from Cami on YouTube. If there's a personal God who loves us, why would the God allow so much unnecessary suffering like Tay-Sachs disease? If it is for us to learn and grow as a person, are there not other ways to learn? So that's the big question. That boils down to the question. Mm-hmm. If you were going to tell me, so I'm a person living my life, and I could see that there could be God, and certain things in life, little babies, make you think there is this divine love behind everything. However, if you guys are going to sit and have a panel and tell me that there's divine love and wisdom running the universe, why is everything so full of misery? And if not for me, for these other people. So so we better answer that question. And I want to start just by saying, without any of us having that particular disease, we don't want to just intellectualize it away. That's a heavy thing. And you want to, whenever people ask that question, I initially just want to honor the suffering. We're going to say some things about it, but it doesn't mean, it turns out God is so good, you shouldn't be mad about anything. I don't think that's, and Swedenborg even talks about how when things are going hard for us, we can say all kinds of nasty things about God, and that's not counted against us because you're at your breaking point. So there's a bit of table setting to begin. I don't want to hear from you guys. So
Cara's got this one.
Yeah, just wrap it up.
Yes, my heart goes out to everyone who's suffering all the time. It's hard to be in this world. I think one thing I've learned out of my own suffering is that it does, as you say, Cami, it helps you grow. I mean, it hits the thing that has grown my compassion for the rest of the world more than anything else is my own suffering. And that feels like something useful that comes out of my own suffering. Another thing is that providing, being someone that people can help. It's a useful thing for people to be able to help other people.
Right.
This all sounds like it's, like you said, it sounds like it's platitudes about heart suffering, but I'm just looking for the good. Swedenborg says that the Lord never allows anything to happen unless good can come from it. So my effort in my suffering is to look for what good is coming from it. Yeah. I don't understand why. I don't know why some people have to have Tay-Sachs or Alzheimer's or whatever. Yeah. So I just try to look for what good might be around the edges.
So that first gets at that word, unnecessary suffering. That as unbelievable as it may seem, not that the suffering is necessary in that you need to suffer this much to the way I would phrase it is, good is coming out of everything, even if it looks like this is something that could never, that when we're looking back on it, we will see overall I'm even better off than I could have been. Other thoughts?
Well, the thoughts that come to my mind, I am an avid reader and studier of Swedenborg and also of Buddhism, and there is a sort of coming together of these paths that I see. And one thought that comes to mind with this is just that in general, Swedenborg says, when we're in this world, we're so outwardly focused. We're totally focused on our senses. And if your consciousness is always there, it's nothing but suffering pretty much all the time. Or it's just a constant back and forth between, oh, things feel good. Oh, no, and now it's going to feel horrible. And now things feel horrible.
Right.
So, and that, lots of religious traditions all talk about how the deeper we go into our consciousness, the more there's a greater stability, or there's an inner resource of just an ever-present, love, like that divine love. And so these are sort of scattered thoughts, but one thought is just that I feel like there's, as much as, like Kara was speaking to, as much as there's suffering, there's compassion. Like the two go together. And so even if it's hard to talk about the origin of suffering, there's suffering, and that just brings out so much compassion in people, and if it weren't that, for your own personal suffering, you get that compassion when you go through horrible things yourself, and then you realize, oh, so many other people are going through these horrible things too. So there is just this huge opportunity for compassion. And as far as like, couldn't there be other ways, for us to learn these things? And I think it's kind of, I'm not in the middle of a crisis right now, and I have been in the past, but so I can sort of speak from a little bit of distance from like that crisis mode suffering. But God is so expansive that even these most horrid, atrocities of our physical and, embodied experience is still totally okay within, like God's ability to transform that or use that as a transformative thing for us to our greatest benefit and the people around us, And sometimes it takes going through just like the worst of the worst, and then you realize, oh my goodness, even this isn't so bad that I can't be experiencing just this immense love, or just this, and presence.
The currency, I think, would be whatever suffering there is, the person going through it, that they at some point would be like, it's okay that happened. If you can get there, then it could be like, okay, maybe God is all right. And I think of, because us watching people suffer, this could never be okay. But I think about the suffering that I've had. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And I think if someone can get to that point, and I think of people who've had near-death experiences, they always say, they even if they've had, I've heard them describe, before I had issues with God, I didn't understand suffering. When you see the plan, or when you see it for what it is, and I don't know what that looks like, I get these technical descriptions from Swedenborg, but when they see it as a living thing, they always come back and say, it's all right. I've never read anything by anyone who's had near-death experience who says, like, life is stupid. They're all like,
right.
This is good. Even though they come back and often they have these horrible recoveries from whatever accident they had. So that's another thought. But Jonathan, I'd love for you to weigh in on the whole thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about the New Testament, the story of the crucifixion, the way that it's told in Luke. An angel comes to Jesus and ministers to him. And in the very next verse, it says Jesus was sweating. He was in agony, and he was sweating like great drops of blood. In other words, even having an angel right there ministering to him didn't take away all of the suffering of the moment. Swedenborg says at one point, and I don't know what people will think of this quote, but he says the entire human race is in distress. And it did something to me when I read that, because I thought a lot about my own suffering and the suffering of people closest to me who you can see.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people, when you see them at a distance, you think, oh, well, they're fine. But everybody I know is suffering, Yeah. But then to read it, so the entire human race is in distress. That makes so much sense to me. I've thought that suffering must be the fastest route to some kind of spiritual awakening. I think it's the quickest, most powerful medicine in terms of compassion, as other people have mentioned. So those are some thoughts.
I think that there's also this combining of a seemingly paradoxical combination of everything that's happening in your life in particular, good is going to come out of it. You know, that it's going to, in the end, you're getting a good deal. It may not seem like it, but in the end you are. And also, your suffering is not because you deserve it or because you brought it on yourself.
Right.
I think about, like we just saw these attacks in Paris, right? All these people have these horrific things happen. Those particular people didn't bring that on them, but it's part of this larger problem in the world. And so there's some combination of, yes, Swedenborg does say divine providence is micromanaging your life to make sure everything that happens to you will only bless you in the long run. And also, you're a casualty of this larger war between good and evil. So I don't know quite how those fit together, but they do. Trust me.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, so
I feel like there's like it was Cami, right? Yeah, that even the fact that we keep asking that question is just such a sign that we all are coming from such a place of love and compassion that we keep saying, "Oh, why do we all need to keep suffering so much this way?" Like, so where is that coming from? And also that like. It's so easy to think about time, as this long history and all the suffering in the world, but it all comes back to the present moment and the fact that God is in the moment. And Swedenborg has that quote about how if you're having a feeling of compassion on somebody, that's actually the Lord being like, do something, there's something for you to do here. Or, and to sort of take it a step further and be like, okay, I am aware of all this suffering in the world. What's one thing I could do? And it's not like, okay, I'm going to go open a nonprofit, but it comes down to just there's always going to be an opportunity throughout the moments of anybody's day to be able to show up with sort of compassion rather than maybe just perpetuating the crap, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's the right word. This will be the final comment on this particular question. It's already 11:30. So, I did like 3 weeks ago have this feeling of I was thinking about helping people. Don't worry, I don't usually go around thinking about helping people. This was an anomaly. But I did think in terms of suffering, you can help and it actually makes a difference. If there wasn't any suffering, you couldn't actually ever help anyone. Swedenborg says the universe was created so that usefulness could exist. And there's probably a particular feeling of, I'm actually going to help this person. And if I didn't go out there and risk something to help them, they're going to suffer. I'm going to go do this and it's real. And what is that? Is that more valuable than we know? What role does that play? So I don't know. So those are all the answers, and it's probably unsatisfying to a lot of you who are suffering in various ways. We're not asking you to be satisfied with suffering because of what we say, but we just wanted to have this conversation with you. So thanks, Cami.
We feel for you.
Yeah, we definitely. Let's take a look at the next one. White Dove, YouTube. How can you see things that the physical body can't see? And we could take that. So that was Swedenborg's day job, was seeing things that the physical body can't see. So, Cara, how did he do it?
I don't know. Supposedly, we have a set of spiritual eyes and a set of natural eyes, and they're operating in different realms. I have friends who have all kinds of seeing things that aren't visible to most people's physical eyes. I have dreams. I have an imagination. I have daydreams. I can imagine seeing things without my physical eyes, but there is a spiritual level of seeing and understanding that is different than our eyeballs. And
they're kind of on a revolving door, as Swedenborg described. Like when your physical eyes are going, your spiritual eyes are closed, and vice versa. Usually, but there are other cases. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about again to go back to the Bible, not to try to hammer this, but the.
Can I talk to you about Jesus?
1 Corinthians. Have you ever thought of? Yeah, the 1 Corinthians 15. There's a quote about there is a natural body and there's a spiritual body, and that we live in the natural body and then we awaken in the spiritual body after we die, and that's been very striking to me. The idea that you have spiritual senses, and as you say, sometimes the physical senses drown out your spiritual senses because they're sort of louder and closer to us because of being in the flesh. But we do have those other eyes. One example, I read a book by a man who went blind as an adult, completely blind, and he just talked about how he dreams in full. He can see perfectly, and then he can tell when he's dreaming versus when he's awake. Because when he's awake, he's blind, but when he's dreaming, he's not.
Yeah.
And so I can't help but think that maybe his spiritual eyes are open, seeing things when he's dreaming. And I find that very comforting, because then as the physical senses fail, these other senses kick in. And Swedenborg says they're even clearer and brighter, and they're more able than our physical senses.
Yep. And Chelsea, did you want to say anything about it?
I do, but yeah. Go now.
Proceed.
Okay.
Yes.
I've been thinking a lot about seeing and light recently, and
Upcoming episode, spoiler alert.
Yeah. But so this idea of how can you see things that the physical body can't see, and really the physical body's ability to see is very limited. It's a very sort of tiny little aspect of our physical experience, and it's one of 5 physical senses, and they're sensing things. So it's about sensing. And so how can we see things that the physical body can't see? We're sort of, if seeing is sort of perceiving or interpreting, receiving information and making something of it in our minds, then we're doing that all the time in ways that the physical body, eyes, has nothing to do with. And people who do go blind, where their auditory ability just gets so specific that they're able to actually navigate through the world just through hearing without relying on their sight. And so I like to think that we have spiritual senses right now, and we're just not, we don't use them very much. But if you sort of think about that, and well, what would a spiritual sense be? And just, and then maybe sort of start to tune into or explore what that might mean. You might realize that you have senses, just that ability to oh, my mom's going to call. Bring, oh, hi, Mom. Weird. How many times is that, people have weird things. If somebody's looking at me and you turn around and they're looking at you, or, that's just one level, but I think there's even more of that, the feeling, spiritual feeling, or, that kind of ability of perceiving things.
Yeah.
I think there's a world there to explore, even while we're alive in this body, that we just don't spend a lot of time on.
I'm glad you took it in that direction, because there's a 50% chance that initially we're answering this question wrong, because it's a text question. So how can you see things? Because it could be saying, how is that possible? Or it could be saying, how can I? Will you tell me how to do it? I will say this. If you are
how can you?
If you are understanding something, that you're understanding a concept, that is your spirit seeing that spiritually. That a concept, an understood concept, is some kind of spiritual object. It's not just a computing process. That spiritual light is what is in your mind when you understand something. So to us, it seems pretty obscure, but you could maybe push that out. I mean, that could be a starting point. We won't go too far into how to do it, because as I always tell everyone who asks, Swedenborg wrote a lot, and he spends barely any time on how to do this trick yourself. He's really going way out into, way out into this crazy world of experience to tell you how to do very practical, mundane things in this world. So I'm going to have to cut it off there so we get to our question. Okay. I do want to say, if anyone at home is hearing squeaking, that's the chair. It's not me. Okay? Let's get to our next one. John, regarding uses, what does Jesus want us to do? And the Jesus that Swedenborg describes is God in a tangible form that we can see and understand. So to say, what does Jesus want to do? What does God want us to do? It's the same to Swedenborg. So uses also as a Swedenborgian term that we were talking about it last question. Actions that benefit something is one way that you could say it. Useful functions he talks about a lot. So the question is, regarding uses, what does Jesus want us to do? Let's have an answer. Yes?
Thought that comes to mind is that something I love very much in what Swedenborg says is that everyone has their own love and their own understanding. So everyone has a slightly different take. Sometimes various forms of religion or spirituality seem to sort of reduce people to a cookie cutter, or like everybody's the same, or they should be the same, or something like that. I like Swedenborg's emphasis that everybody's supposed to be different.
Yeah.
And he says that angels feel nauseous at even just the idea that any two people are the same. because we're all supposed to be different. So what does Jesus want us to do individually and specifically? You know, there are generic things you could say, like, well, have compassion, learn truth, you know, gain an understanding. But I think what he specifically wants is that if there's something that you can identify that you love more than anybody you know loves, or something you know about more than anybody you know knows about that, see if you can figure out a way to be useful to other people with that thing.
Right.
Because that's your special gift that you have to give to other people. You occupy a certain spiritual territory that nobody else is on. And so that's what Jesus wants you to do, to deploy your specific gifts that make you different than everybody else.
I accept that answer. Do you guys have other ones?
Gracious of you.
Yeah.
My just immediate thought to that was in regard to the suffering issue. Often our usefulness to others comes out of our suffering. I mean, in a big way. Like how many
Right,
psychologists came through difficult childhoods or something like that.
True.
I saw a movie recently. It had a sad ending, but this guy had. Oh, was it American Sniper? Probably American Sniper, where he's like goes out and he is in war and he's all messed up and he finds he's really PTSD, can't interact with his family well, but he goes to this place where there's wounded veterans, and in interacting with them and trying to help them, he finds normalcy again. And I don't want to spoil the end of the movie. It doesn't end that happily, but the point is that's exactly what you're talking.
That's so true.
Yeah,
It really heightens your awareness of like, oh, people really need this.
Need help in this
Well,
arena or something.
and there was that, and then I'll kick it over. But there was that story of there was a woman who, and I don't have good names or dates for this, but there was a woman who stopped someone who was going to commit a mass shooting. I don't know if you guys heard about this. There was a guy who came into somewhere. I don't know any of the facts. It's not a funny subject, but and he had a weapon and he was going to kill a bunch of people. But she talked him out of it, and she said in an interview later that she had all kinds of hard things happen to her in her life, and she felt like everything that had happened in her life was preparing her for that moment. I'm getting goosebumps from that. Preparing her for that moment. This is her own word. You know, that was what it was all for, and so it was out of her suffering that she was able to stop a lot more suffering. So, Chelsea.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I like all of this.
See, are you guys glad you showed up tonight?
There's I feel like just the other side of that, even though I like living life that way, is just the very basic, you know, if you don't feel so connected to that specific, you know, or maybe your life isn't such, I don't know. Anyway, the thoughts that came to mind was just, you know, the basic to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, you know, so just there's a usefulness to just showing up to what your day brings you and, you know, doing it, whatever, honestly. And so.
True.
I find that there are basic principles, you know, that are in a lot of traditions. Swedenborg states them, you know, looking for, wanting to serve, not wanting to be better than other people, these kinds of things. And these are sort of the push away the negative stuff. And then Swedenborg says in regeneration, in spiritual growth, our primary job is to push away the conceit, harmful things. The good stuff will then, you know, flow in. So it seems like once somebody told me life is like a string of pearls, grab one and the rest will follow. And I just thought, because we get all wound up in, you know, can I find the perfect job? Can I find spirituality? You know, will my life circumstances turn out like I want? And the idea of, okay, I'm going to grab this pearl, which is following the tradition of love to my best of my ability. The rest can follow from that. So
right, and that's cool. That's something that I think I've come to, that I've noticed, is that we can get so much in our heads about it, and that the idea that it just can come down to the, you know, living the 10 Commandments, and sort of that's what I'm meant to take care of, and then knowing that things will come into your life or experiences will happen that are leading you on this path that is specific to you, you know. And so, I mean, it's a great, rich journey, but it can come down to very simple, you know, what's the next right thing?
Swedenborg describes, like, the two big goals for us are love of God and love of the neighbor. And he defines charity, or love of the neighbor, as, kindness, goodwill, as honestly, justly, and faithfully doing whatever your job is today. And that's just a great way to serve the entire world, is by honestly, justly, and faithfully doing.
Well, and think if everybody was doing that, I mean, how would you feel about, oh, should we take this rest stop here? Well, why not? Everybody there is going to be honestly, justly, and faithfully doing what they're supposed to do today. That sounds good. You wouldn't be like, should we go visit that place? Of course we should. Everyone there is trying to do their best, and that would be nice. Be a nice place to travel. Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks, John. Let's take a look at the next question. Thomas, I wonder if Swedenborg says anything about numerology in his books. What is numerology? That's my question. Yeah.
I don't know too much about numerology, but I believe it's a way of reading numbers in the way that people read words.
Okay.
That there are meanings within numbers and so on.
Well, then he does.
Swedenborg doesn't use the term numerology to the best of my knowledge. Don't know if that term was around back then. But he does. First of all, he's very interested in numbers himself and what numbers mean.
Right.
He talks about the numbers in the Bible having meaning, which a lot of people believe they do. And he also says that the highest angels, who he calls the heavenly angels or celestial angels, either sometimes speak or communicate in numbers, or that just when they're talking, numbers are just sort of displayed around them. There's something about the order of numbers. So I find that very intriguing.
Yeah.
And so I can certainly see an affinity between what he says and numerology.
That's one way to make the Bible a lot more interesting, is if you realize there's some very interesting meaning to any number that you come across. Like, you can just open the Bible to any chapter of any book and read through it, and it'll just sound like gobbledygook, maybe. Yeah. And then you go through and say, wait, it said there were 3 people, and it was 47 years, and it was on the 10th day of the 7th month. And then you just know that there's just so much going on there.
So let's do a little popcorn, what basic numbers. 40 has to do, and this is in what Swedenborg describes in Secrets of Heaven, all over the internal sense of the Old and New Testaments, the words in them. 40 is state of temptation or spiritual struggle. So 40 days rain and makes the ark go up. So that's why it was 40 days. That's the completion of temptation. Okay.
We can all go around. Yeah.
7 is holiness, like the 7 days of creation, or what else is 7? There's lots of 7s.
Well, 7 months. It could be 70 times 7.
70 times 7. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything 7.
Anything 7.
Yeah. 3 has to do with truth.
3 days that he rose and that kind of thing.
3 is also complete. That's right. 3 is often like it's 1, 2, and then on the 3rd day something. You try 3 times and then the 3rd time it works, kind of thing. So 3rd time is a charm, people say.
Right. Go ahead.
My 2 favorites are 12 is sort of all of goodness and truth, so it can describe sort of the variety and the balance too. It's 6 and 6. It's just this. There's 12 gates to the 12 city, gates, 12 disciples, 12
tribes of Israel.
12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
And then 10 is just remains, or just the little things that get you through. Like,
so what's remains is a Swedenborgian term. What does remains mean?
Well, there's different ways. It can mean, as far as I know, it's sort of the storehouse of any positive experience where you get to experience something that's true. So whether it's like a real experience of love in your life, or
from childhood
or something, and also any true ideas that really connect you. It's connecting you to heaven, to the spiritual world. And so these can be in you, but they can sometimes be very hidden or very dormant or get very buried by a lot of junk that you build up in life and everything. But then the Lord, there's the chapter, I'm blanking on what one it is, but, it's Abraham telling,
one of those guys,
saying, are you going to kill everybody in Sodom and Gomorrah? But what if there's 40 people left and they're good? And God says, all right, fine, I won't kill them. Well, what about 25, 30, everything? He goes down, finally gets to 10, because that's that special number 10 of the remains. Yeah. And that's, if there's even just the littlest remnant of something good in somebody, would you still destroy them? And God says, no, I won't.
So this is an example of what I was talking about the external sense of a story in the Old Testament looking sketchy, but the internal sense is good. So externally, you think, okay, why is God going to kill a whole city? Like, what does he gain from killing a whole city of people? But if you know that's all about the individual human mind and the numbers going down, even if you have the tiniest little shred of goodness and truth in you that God can draw on, you won't die spiritually. Not that God will kill you, but you won't want hell. Even if you have that, God can pull it out. So there's this God always coming after you to get. So that. Does that make sense at home? Probably not. Okay, but that's what I was talking about when I said it's a flip, man. It's like seems like it's bad, but it's good. Let's get to our next question. Thanks, Thomas. Lisa, what was Swedenborg's favorite experience in the spirit world? What did he see? What was his favorite? Did he ever have it? And you guys have seen the original text. Does he have like a star in the margins that says like, "This was the coolest thing I ever saw"?
Lots of happy faces and hearts.
Yeah.
Emoticons.
Boy, there was so much. What he does instead of stars is he writes NB, nota bene, which means note well, and at some of his margins they'll say NB, 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 NB.
Yes.
But the thing is, he does that thousands of times all the time.
You think about like having so many experiences of that caliber, and I gotta remember this. But the next day, I gotta remember this.
That was really important.
Yeah.
I would say this is just going way out on a limb and speaking for him, but I would say that his experience of realizing how present this divine love was, divine love and wisdom, how even the events of his own life, had been shaped by the hand of God, and there was a meaning in it all, and that whole everything spiritual is so close at hand. He says at one point people think it's like some distant thing that you can hardly see. He says it's like a bird of paradise that's almost brushing your eye with its feathers. It's so close.
Yeah.
I think that was very powerful to him, and the way that he writes about just who the Lord is and what that divine compassion and love is, how intelligent and loving and amazing God is. I think that's what blew him away. And those highest angels who most kind of embody that as close as a human being can get to that outside of the Lord.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else want to speak for Swedenborg? Post-mortem. All right, but that's what we're asked to do, and so that's what we're doing. Actually, this whole thing we're kind of speaking for, like this whole show. I wonder, if he could watch it today, or if he does in spiritual life.
No,
hey,
it wasn't that. That's not it. They don't have any of it right.
Cancel your show. You're ruining my reputation.
That was utterly wrong.
Okay, let's take a look. I think we have time for two more, so we're going to do two more questions. And if you're still watching, good on you. Okay, this is from Guy. I understand that Swedenborg never mentioned the idea of reincarnation, but has he ever mentioned a pre-Earth existence or a spiritual life prior to inhabiting a body? Great question. And we could go, we could talk a little bit about, he doesn't mention reincarnation. I'd love to talk about the sort of non-reincarnation similarities between the ideas of reincarnation, and because it's some people there's a hard cut, there's no reincarnation, but Swedenborg does, just like the reincarnation principle says you continue to develop over multiple lifetimes. Swedenborg says you continue to develop forever. It's just that you do it in the spiritual world instead of here. He says that each stage there is like an egg to the one that follows. Right. He also part of reincarnation is to say you work out your own issues lifetime after lifetime. Here he says that actually lineages work out those issues, like parents pass it to children, pass it in your work. So it's not there are similarities, but he doesn't seem to say that you come back. Does he say? I haven't found him saying anything about a pre-life.
Yeah.
No.
Me neither. No, I haven't found anything about a pre-life, and that's a popular idea these days, and I can see that it might solve some problems of sort of the unfairness of being alive.
Right.
That maybe if there were decisions made ahead of time that you forgot, or that you picked those dysfunctional parents as the best place for you to be in, or something. Swedenborg doesn't have a hint of that anywhere, and I imagine he would probably say that it doesn't work that way because he's so big on the idea that kind of what you might call the tabula rasa, that when we're born we sort of exist in a potential form, but we're not, and you have a certain nature that you can see in little children, but the mind is really not formed. It starts at birth. That mind gets to be formed and so on. So I don't think he would believe that there could be a mind. He's very big on the fact that the mind dwells in the brain, and that the mind is a spiritual form and that lives in this organic form of the brain and so on. So I'm not sure he would. I think he believes that you have to be born in the flesh to develop that mind. You know, before you're born in the flesh, you wouldn't have it. So that's my guess as to what he would say.
Other thoughts?
I think it's an interesting thing that just the way that, babies are born, and it is so much that I think Swedenborg talks about that the necessity of our time in the physical world to prepare us for our eternal life in the spiritual world.
Right.
And yet God, like, when I think in terms of, like, and maybe I'm just thinking about this differently than other people do, but with the idea of reincarnation or pre-life existence, like, I just think God loves creating new human beings that are just totally unique and are going to exist forever. Like, our sense of self is such an interesting thing, and I think, it's such a gift that God gives us. And so, of course, he's just wanting to make more and more of these people, and that they are just totally unique, and then they get to exist as themselves and have this sense of self. And so, again, with this, physical world focus, like, there's the spiritual world is so much bigger than just our little planet or physical world, whatever.
Yeah.
And so we can, so our path is just, it can be lots of individual people.
And there's an issue with asking about something before, and that's because there's not actually time. I mean, in this, Swedenborg says time as we see it in the physical world is an appearance, physical world appearance, that the spiritual is reality. Physical is kind of a program running off the spiritual world, and there's not actually time like we perceive it here. Also, if you're talking about God and creating us in pre-birth, God sees all time as the present. So somehow God is... And if we are unique individuals that embody a particular affection, as he says, yes, there has to already be a little space carved out for you before you're here, because you come out of some, do you know what I'm saying? You come out of some kind of potential, but there's not really before to God. So, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to say about that.
And definitely, it's amazing how long before little tiny children have the foggiest idea they exist as a separate entity from others or whatever. They already have a nature. You can have 14 kids, they'll all be different than each other. And so there is something there to that nature. Right. But I do think it's more about the hand of God than necessarily a pre-existence up in the spiritual world, and then you come down kind of idea.
Yeah.
So,
what comes to mind is the quote from Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So that, somehow God's creating, like you said, he's creating these new wonderful people, but that's different than us sitting around waiting till we make our entrance.
Right.
Yeah.
It can be boring.
Yeah.
Waiting. The waiting is tedious.
I want to say something that I like about that idea of pre-life, which you touched on in the beginning. I like emotionally the idea. Yes, we had. You think about this person you've had such a hard time with in life. The idea that you guys were sitting around chummy beforehand, like, we're gonna do this. It's gonna be really hard, but it's gonna be good for both. That is like really emotionally potent. So I hear where that's coming from. There's got to be, even if the world is as Swedenborg says it is, there's got to be some kind of equivalent of that. Not that you were sitting around with them, but that on some level we're all going to get to a place where we're like, man, you really caused me a lot of problems, and that's how it was supposed to be, and we're buddies. So however that comes about.
Yeah. I just love that point that God exists and the spiritual reality exists outside of time and space. And so, Swedenborg does say you can go insane thinking about things in terms of time and space and trying to apply those concepts to the spiritual world. Yeah. And that idea, it really is true that with newborns, they don't know that they're their own thing before they already are their own thing. And so just how we're always in this cosmic hide and seek in this world and in the next world, in terms of like, it'll probably make a lot more sense when we're fully on the other side in the spiritual world.
With that, let's get to our very last question. Drum roll. Karen Land, YouTube. Does Swedenborg say anything about the Earth being a living entity? He says that everything physical is sort of a shell for spiritual something. That we are physical, that our physical bodies without a spiritual something inside are dead. So that's how I want to lay so the earth, the physical earth, is just physical matter, like anything. But it's got to have some kind of spiritual component to it, or else it couldn't exist. So that's how I want to open it up. Does that make sense? So the question is, does he talk about, there's sort of an idea currently about the earth as a conscious, sentient being. I don't know. So I want to hear what you guys think about it. Tell me the truth. Yeah.
I mean, I've got a couple of thoughts.
Sure.
One is that Swedenborg talks a lot, especially in his book Divine Love and Wisdom, about how creation happened and how there was divine love and wisdom, and then that came down to another level, and it became atmospheres and lands and water in the spiritual world.
Right.
And then that came down to the physical world, became atmospheres and land and water. And so he says that even in the physical soil, even in the, even in rocks and the most inert, inanimate things, there's still something of God in there. There's a purpose, and I've thought of it sometimes as like a programmer who writes a program will often leave a back door so they can get back into the program and hack it, remotely or something like that. God wouldn't have created all this without creating a back door so he could get into it. So there's access to it. The other thought, and so I think there's a way of seeing it that it's alive. The other thought that came to mind is that Swedenborg says that the highest angels and little children have the same attribute, which is that they see that everything is alive.
Man, I was going to say that when they came back.
Sorry.
Elaborate a little bit.
Their toys, everything. And I think I have to admit, as I go along, I'm no celestial angel, but you start to realize that, like I have 3 pens in my pocket, but one of them's sort of jealous of the other one because I really like, it's a silly way to think about life. Yeah. And yet it's true. It's sort of fun that these things really do have a kind of a life to them. Now, in terms of the whole planet having its own consciousness, I don't know. I don't know where Swedenborg would come out on that idea. But I think the way he sees it is just the divine life, like the whole universe is just shot through with that divine life. Yeah. It's everywhere, and everything is purposeful. I like the way that you can have leaves fall in your gutter and a little bit of rain, and then it turns into soil. It's just like dying to turn into a field up there. It's that's even the most. It's just the dirt, or whatever. Yeah. It's dying to turn into something, be something useful, and generate something. So that is an amazing quality about the world.
Yeah. Do you guys want to put in your 2 cents here?
Yeah, I think that it reminds me of how Swedenborg says that, he describes God as the underlying divine reality. And so there is a lot of talk about, is it a continuum? Is this physical world to the spiritual world just this, can you go from here to God, and that's just a straight shot? So we are just sort of an expression of God, and this is, so even the dirt is God, or something in one way. But I love the balance that Swedenborg gets into about how essential the physical universe is. And it makes sense to me, I guess, sort of philosophically, or just that you have this divine being who is divine love and wisdom itself. But if you are this divine being, you want to create, you just want to manifest yourself, so really the divine can't exist apart from its manifestation. Like these 2 parts have to be together. And so Swedenborg says that the spiritual world, its foundation is the physical world. Like it couldn't exist without the physical world. Yeah. Even though it's so sort of the reason, the purpose, the everything, it sort of feels like, what's us? We're just a bunch of dirt whirling through the galaxy or something.
Angels couldn't exist if there weren't people on Earth.
Right. So there's something so essential about this physical world. But then when you get down into it, when you have us as these sort of like sentient beings that are then looking at this physical Earth that ends, I think it just sort of turns into, just like how if, we understand with physics or whatever, that actually the deeper you go into matter, the more space there is. Like there's actually not a lot of, this whole solidity thing is a little bit of an illusion. And so like when we approach physical Earth, it's dead, according to Swedenborg, like the sun of the physical world is, it's all just matter, but really it ends up being just this very thin veil so that you're just experiencing the divine, that underlying divine reality that's just so present, and yet there has to be this distinction, or there's this two-ness about it, and yet it's like so connected.
And it's all an image. He says that in the physical world, you can see God like you'd see someone in a mirror. So it's not that this table is God, but this table is telling me something about God. And everything is delivering that message. That's like semi-poetic, so why don't we end on that? We're at our time here. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate getting the questions. If we didn't get time to get to yours, feel free to leave them in the comment section. We'll try to get to them later on. Next week, we return to our regularly scheduled programming format. We're going to talk about the effect of gratitude. So we'll see you then. Don't forget to like this program, please, if you did like it. And if you didn't, don't click it. It wouldn't be honest. Subscribe to the channel. All these things help us out and help get the message out. And if you want to support the programming, feel free to make a donation. Swedenborg Foundation is a nonprofit, so that means we try to do good and we won't just try to make money for ourselves. Okay, thanks everybody. See you next week.